Hey, Brochim Aboyim, welcome everyone, good morning. I wanted to respond to, now that Baruch Hashem we're back on YouTube, want to respond to some of what we found here on some of these comments on YouTube. So Danforth, I don't know if you're related to Jim Danforth, the special effects artist. If you are, I guess that's pretty cool. And if not, I'm sorry if I offended you by asking. But anyway, our friend here, Danforth, said this is only partially related to the video, but since you mentioned the coronation of Charles III, I'd like to ask about the participation of the chief rabbi in the ceremony, which certain online rabbis harshly criticize. I'm not Jewish, but to my admittedly limited knowledge, there is historic precedence to that. How does Judaism deal with political religious events of this kind? Can rabbis participate in them? Thank you, Rav. And thank you, Danforth, for asking an excellent question. I did not subject myself to listening to one of my harshest criticizers and his students talking about this event, because I don't consider their opinions worthy of giving attention to. Some friends of mine have sent me some of the clips, and I didn't even bother to look at them. I do have a good friend of mine, although we haven't seen each other probably since my wedding, almost 17 years ago, in 2006, the end of 2006. But someone I went to yeshiva with is Rabbi Avi Grossman, who did make several videos, not attacking the chief rabbi, but lamenting the chief rabbi's participation in this event, but recognizing the way that he expressed himself using the Hebrew terminology and the rabbinical terminology that he used, that Rabbi Grossman looked at Chief Rabbi of England, Rabbi Mervis, the Chief Rabbi of the United Synagogue. There are other communities in England, including ultra-Orthodox communities, that are religiously to the right of Rabbi Mervis's community. But the way that my friend Rabbi Grossman, who we disagree on a lot of things, including this, looked at it, although not 100% disagreeing. The way he looked at it is that the Chief Rabbi of England is the most unfortunate Jew in the world, and to use the rabbinical and Hebrew parlance that he used, that he is an anus. He made several videos for Machon Shiloh. I guess he's become one of the teachers for Machon Shiloh over the years. Rabbi Grossman has, and he says that Rabbi Mervis is an anus. He is under duress. He is forced by his monarch to participate in these proceedings, and Rabbi Grossman, proceeded to make fun of all the proceedings, etc. First and foremost, I question the wisdom of making such videos in English at all. Whether I agree or disagree, and I do disagree with everything except for perhaps this idea that halachically speaking, one could consider Rabbi Mervis an anus, which also probably is not the case. I don't really see him as an anus. He's not going to get killed if he doesn't participate. King Charles is not going to kill the chief rabbi if he fails to participate in this if he failed to. He didn't participate. If he failed to participate in this procession. But it should be noted, Kodesh Kodashim, the Satmar Rav Zchus Galenu, the Holy of Holies of the 20th century. I know a lot of people disagree with him, but I don't think anyone can who is serious can disagree that the Satmarov was a holy man. And not only that, but holy in the sense that he separated himself from so many of these worldly type of things. When King Rudolph, I believe, or was it King Carol? King Carol of Romania was visiting that area on the border of Hungary and Romania. My family considered themselves Hungarians. They lived there. When the king was visiting, the Satmarov went to greet him, and there's a picture of him standing next to clergy of other faiths. There was an Orthodox priest there, and the Satmarov, he was there with his tilip, with his fur-lined coat, and he took his hat off. He had his yarmulke on, but rare type of thing that he would be in a public place without his hat, to show respect, even though it's contrary to our traditions. We show the respect by wearing a hat in those circles, certainly. But he showed respect, and it was an outdoor event. There was really no reason for him to have to take off his hat, but to show respect to the king, he took off his hat, and the king shook the Rebbe's hand, which I'm sure the Rebbe probably wasn't that happy about, but he understood that was his responsibility. And the story goes that the Orthodox priests, or perhaps bishops, standing next to him, were somewhat perturbed that the king extended his hand to the rabbi, to the Rebbe, to the Grand Rabbi, the Chief Rabbi of the area, before extending his hand to his fellow Christian. That wasn't necessarily a religious ceremony in the same sense as the coronation was, but nonetheless, as our friend here is pointing out, there is precedent for participation in such events, and also, instead of looking at it as an unfortunate issue, to be impressed by, being a student of history and understanding that over 1,000 years ago or so, or no, it was less than 1,000 years ago, actually just around 1,000 years ago, when there was a coronation of the king, the Jews sought to attend, and they were summarily removed. And not too much after that, they were summarily removed from England. We're coming up to Chaf Gimel. Well, that's actually more for the Crusades, but Chaf Gimel ER, and we remember the types of history that the Jewish people, the Jewish communities have gone through, whether it's in England, other parts of Europe, and other parts of the world. And to see the fact that the Chief Rabbi is recognized and welcomed to such an event, I think is quite incredible and telling. And it should be a cause for somewhat of a celebration, but nonetheless, it's still bittersweet. Of course, historically speaking, go back to Germany, and I'm sure there were similar practices in other parts of Europe, probably including England, once the Jews came back to England, or perhaps before the Jews were expelled from England. But there's a sefer called Minhagei Vermeise, which is the customs, the practices that were observed in Worms, in Germany, which was a very famous Jewish community, and from where my ancestry going back were chief rabbis in Worms. And so for that reason, I have a very strong interest in studying about of those practices, and the version of the book I have actually includes footnotes from my ancestor, the Chavos Yoyer. And so I especially enjoy reading those because of my ancestry. And it's recorded there that there was a process for members of the Jewish community to have various titles within the community, which is something that is still observed to a certain extent, particularly in the German Jewish communities, that continue to have some of these practices, not with all of the same pomp and circumstance, perhaps, and certainly not with this aspect. But there was such a thing in history, that when someone was given a title of a parnes, which would be basically a member, a lay leader, a member of the Jewish Community Council in Worms, and most likely in other places in Germany and throughout Europe. They needed approval from the local Christian clergy, and not only approval, but to actually go, it would seem, again, we can look at this inside at some point, go to the cathedral, and there was a ceremony performed under the auspices of the bishop, and there was someone there, probably a deacon. It says Malumud, it says Malumud, some student who was there, and he read from a Sefer Galachos, a Galach's book, a priest's book, of some kind of a ceremonial reading in order to permit the Jewish community to have their own leaders. Now, obviously, that was a sign of subjugation of the Jewish community under the rule of the Christian community, and that was all around the time, when this was being written, was around the time of the Reformation. So I'm not sure, if this was a practice that was both done in Catholic Germany and in Lutheran Germany. I'd like to learn more about that part of the history, especially since that was the center point of where the Reformation took place. But the point is that there was always this history of the Jewish community, even lay people, certainly chief rabbis, would participate in something like this, the coronation of a king. Oh, I hope that turkey makes it. Oh, they slowed down. The turkey's going the other way. All right. The turkey is fine. Is she coming back? What's she doing? All right. I didn't want to hit the turkey. Wouldn't do as much damage as a cow or a deer, but I'm driving my mom's car. I'd rather not hit any turkeys either. But now I'm keeping up the traffic behind me, which I usually eschew. But in any event, I don't know. Do people like it when I talk about what I see in front of me while I'm driving? Interrupt. I have a little bit of ADD, I guess. Back to what we're talking about. So, in England, certainly there has been a long-standing tradition that chief rabbis at least attend coronation. And also, the various questions as to whether or not Christianity is idolatry, most Ashkenazim understand, like the Meiri, that for non-Jews, Christianity is not idolatry. You know, I know my friend Rabbi Grossman was quoting from the Rambam, but also the Rambam lived in the pre-Reformation time. It's one aspect. But the other aspect is that the Meiri seems to be talking also in the pre-Reformation time. So, you know, whether particularly the Church of England is an idolatrous church or not, again, these types of questions have a lot to consider. But even if it is idolatrous, as Rabbi Grossman pointed out in his videos, part of the Gezeres HaGolus, part of the decrees of exile, is V'sham avadata Elohim acherim eitz ve'evan. There you will serve other gods. That this week's parsha has the tochacha, but you know this particular eitz and evan, of course, is in the second tochacha in Parshas Kisavo, in the end of Deuteronomy. And it's generally understood to mean that not that we will worship other gods in these other countries where we'll be sent to exile, but we'll be forced into the servitude of the servants of those other gods. That is part of the Golus, it's part of the exile, it's part of the divine decree of exile, is that humiliation that we have to endure. And I guess, to me, to a certain extent, I mean, you know, I know Rabbi Grossman, he quoted what seems how he understands from the Rambam, that it's prohibited for a Jew to even reside in a city where there's a church. Again, that's an untenable type of approach. I mean, if that's the case, I believe he resides in Jerusalem. So is he saying he cannot reside in Jerusalem? There are churches in Jerusalem. There are churches in the old city. So I'm not exactly sure what he's trying to bring out by mentioning how he understands the opinion of Maimonides, which Maimonides, you know, oftentimes was speaking about in the eschaton and not in today's world, today's, you know, fallen state of the world. So it's the whole thing is kind of ridiculous. Now, again, I'm not giving any recognition to some of these fellows from Florida who just like to be, I don't know, disrespectful to Rabbonim that they disagree with. You know, and I disagree with Rabbi Mervis on many points. But a lot of those, I think some of the other points that they brought up, there is where Rabbi Mervis is more of an anus. You know, if he would tell King Charles, I love you very much, I appreciate everything you do for our community, but religiously I cannot attend this event, King Charles would respect that. But that's clearly not his opinion. It's clearly not the opinion of Rabbi Mervis that he is an anus, that he's being forced to participate in something like this against his will, but rather that there's a moral and ethical requirement of hakaras hatov. I mean, people know my father wasn't Jewish. And I remember talking to one of my rabbeim about if his funeral would take place, would include a funeral mass in the church. What is the? It didn't in the end. He just had a service in a funeral home, which was led by a deacon. But this Rabbi of mine, a strong Breslover Chassid, and a big Talmud Chacham, a Dayan, a Paisik, he said, if he was in my shoes, he would attend the Mass. Obviously, I'm not taking communion or anything like that, not participating, but attending. And I did participate in the funeral at the funeral home. Now, is that to say that is halachically the right thing to do, the wrong thing to do? Sometimes, obviously, everything has to be measured out, and that's why you have to talk to a posik, to a rav, about these types of things. So some people say, well, you picked the wrong rav. You picked the wrong posik, and that's what they told this rabbi also on many things that he did. He's not my only rav. He's not my local rav. He's someone who I have a strong shaykhis to and learn from. But we have to live pragmatically. I think something was very telling, though, about this particular procession. All the other clergy, if you notice, in that religious procession, and one of the other things that Rabbi Grossman was upset about was, presenting as a Jew among other religions, meaning to say Judaism is just another religion. And the problems in that. Now, that's one of the things, interestingly, that the Satmar Rav was upset at the state of Israel about. In the state of Israel, they have the Misrad Hadatot, the Ministry of Religions. And he expressed dismay that the members of Aguda sought representation in the Misrad Hadatot. I remember talking about this to one Satmar Rosh Shiva. He said, the Misrad Hadusais. Not saying that to be facetious or mocking. But one of the things that the Satmar Rav was upset at Aguda for was that they sought participation and recognition in the Ministry of Religions. Along the lines, though, of how things were in Hungary, where there were 4 or 5 different Jewish communities, and they had government recognition. And so it's interesting that the Satmar Rav knew very well why in a European country it would be, and in Germany was like that when there was the split between Orthodoxy and Reform, and there was a question, should there be one united Jewish community or 2 separate ones, and then in Hungary they took it to 4 or 5 separate communities. So the Satmar Rav Zechusi Elena would very well understand why there would be a need for such recognition in Europe. But he was opposed to an ultra-Orthodox organization seeking such recognition in Israel. He wasn't talking there about the Rabbanut. He understood the Rabbanut was going to be involved there, and of course the United Synagogue is essentially the equivalent, ideologically to a certain extent, of the Rabbanut in Israel. And then there are the more right-wing Haredi groups in Israel and in England that did not participate they did not send their chief rabbi to this event. This was an event that it was appropriate for a modern Orthodox chief rabbi to attend, and would not be appropriate, perhaps, for an ultra-Orthodox chief rabbi to attend. And Rabbi Mervis is probably the most ultra-Orthodox chief rabbi that England has ever had, that the United Synagogue has ever had. He has more of the yeshiva background as opposed to Rabbi Sachs, Zeichet Tzaddik Levracha, who was not yeshiva educated. I love Rabbi Sachs, again, even though I disagree with his Zionism. I think he was one of the most important Jewish figures of our time. Not a Gadol B'Torah, but an important Jewish leader and an important rabbinical leader. And a tremendous chacham. And a shtickle Talmud chacham. So, can't tell if this is a cop or not. Anyway, Rabbi Mervis came from more, again, of a yeshiva background than Rabbi Sachs did. But in any event, that's the point that we're bringing out here. The fascinating thing that I felt with this whole procession, getting back to, I got distracted, was that these other clergy people and other representatives, including, there was a Sikh representative who was a member of the House of Lords, and he wore his regalia representing himself as a member of the House of Lords, in addition to his Sikh turban. But the chief rabbi came in a simple, but everyone else had some kind of traditional garb, some sort of formal robes or something like that. And Rabbi Mervis came with just a yarmulke and a suit and tie. Didn't even wear a kapota, not a frock. Didn't wear the canonical garb that is traditional of the chief rabbinate of England, which often was a robe with preaching bands. And I did see him at his installation as chief rabbi wearing a blue robe and a tallis, and a rather simple blue robe, but like something like a clergy robe. And he could have worn something like that, or some sort of a bekisha, or something along those lines. Obviously, that's not his tradition. He doesn't come from a Hasidic background, as far as I know. But instead, he chose to just wear a simple suit and tie and the yarmulke, no hat, just a suit and a tie and the yarmulke. And how the chief rabbinate has changed in history, in England, because if you look in the old days, the members of the United Synagogue wore collars like priests, and like I said, preaching bands and robes and things. And so he could have presented himself there with a tallis and with some sort of a robe and some more formal canonical garb, but instead he was simply wearing a suit and tie. And I wonder what kind of a statement that made. Now, me, I like the pomp and circumstance. I love to see Rabbi Soloveitchik from the Spanish-Portuguese synagogue when he wears his canonical garb with the preaching bands and everything. But essentially, that's what I am, fascinated by, is the fact that he chose not to wear this canonical garb. And I posit that perhaps this was an expression. Now, perhaps had something to do with it being Shabbos. And that could be a reason why he did not wear it. Because it was unpractical to do so. But still, nonetheless, I think he's making an interesting statement by not wearing the canonical garb. By saying it, perhaps expressing that which my friend Avi was saying, that he is an anus, and not celebrating his participation so much. But to me, I think one of the most touching things was the various videos that are on YouTube. The Portnoy brothers bringing the 300 kids from the various day schools that are under the auspices of the United Synagogue to sing Adon Olam under a new arrangement. I found that incredibly interesting and touching. I was crying when I watched it. And the other video of the choir with the Chief Rabbi singing a Nosei Shua, singing the prayer for the government and for the new king. So I find these things to be very, very interesting, very fascinating. So, I think, as much as, I know a lot of, my wife was very upset, at the person of King Charles, and especially because of her respect for Princess Diana. And that was an issue that she felt was, she didn't care anything, what that guy was doing. Because of that. But in any event, it wasn't a cop at all. So I slowed down for nothing. Anyway, there's a lady with a kid in the back. Looked just like the police cars. But anyway, I should still make it to work on time. But those are some of the things that I was looking at with this question and with this, certainly it was a cause célèbre, and just respect for the office of the king. Yes, it is. The King of England is mostly a religious leader. He is the leader of the Church of England. And that is his main role, more than his political. And a ceremonial head of state. This was going to be a religious event, but the fact that he showed respect, extending to the Chief Rabbi abilities for Shmir Shabbos and so forth, to me, I think this is a reason. He did the right thing. I certainly believe. If I were the Chief Rabbi, I would have come in some kind of robe or something more. I thought it was funny that on Shabbos, I was wearing a fancier bekisha. I was wearing my bekisha with struckers and my various colored bekisha, tish bekishas, and that was what I was wearing, as opposed to these just a plain suit and tie. While the King of England the Chief Rabbi of England was so plainly dressed. But again, I understand perhaps it wasn't only because of his own personal culture, but he was perhaps making a statement. I'm sure there was some old, church, United Synagogue people who were saying, why for this event he should have brought out the canonicals, Wow. But maybe he didn't want to walk, 15 minutes with there and back with the canonical garb. But in any event, the whole thing, I think he did the right thing. I know those other people in Florida, they criticized me for, doing recreational events on Shabbos, where, again, I'm keeping Shabbos, but maybe not in a place that it seems like it's in the spirit of Shabbos. But it is what it is. Sometimes you have to do things for Shalom Bayis, and also make statements by participating in some of these things. So that's the whole story. I guess I think I exhausted everything that I wanted to say about this. Thank you for watching. God bless. Please like, share, subscribe, comment, and we'll see you later.